just
There you
got
go.
to hit it once.
Okay. Thanks, Giselle. See how mindful you are now of the swivel? So when all of you are in my instructional design and you're swiveling your lessons, it's going to be so easy for you. So on 135 are the 13 different categories of disabilities. And if you look over what the pertinent information is too, not that the categories are not, but read down through the categories. See if there's any categories that you're really not familiar with, that you really are not quite sure. Then I want you to look over the number of students. Now this, again, this is old data. It has changed. What was that? And that was data from 2010 to 2011. Some of the terminology has changed over time with the labels and disabilities. Not necessarily. Visual impairments would be visually challenged. Like, for example, I had a student that came over from Haiti. She was adopted. And she was in an orphanage, plus her brother came over also with her. And she was actually albino, and albinos typically have visual impairment. And like she could not be in sunlight, she had to be guarded. But she also had visual impairment as far as reading text, because with that, she has a contrast in the print with black and white. So we had to have everything enlarged. And we did have, most districts do now, but there's a visually impaired specialist that works with students. And we had to buy the special equipment, which is like a large computer screen and you slide the books under. Plus I had to order all large print books. So that's one part of a category with visually impaired. Wearing glasses is not a visual impairment. It's more in the blindness or if you've had an accident that caused, some sort of visual impairment. And then they work with them, and it could be Braille if you're visually impaired, or it could be the large screen. It could be read to, someone else's scripting. It depends on the severity of the visual impairment. Some might have an aid that scripts, all of their information. What's another category you may not be familiar with?
Would deaf blind be both or just one?
It could be one or the other, or it could be both. It depends on the disability. Some students are just deaf, and some are deaf and blind, or some are just blind. So we have different teachers that work with the two impairments. That's a good question. Other health impaired is the category where many students fall under, like possibly into a 504 category. There are other health impaired under IDEA when the impairment could be like an ADHD, possibly, but it has to show that there's severe learning impairment also with it. A 504 can be for a child with ADHD, not having the severity of discrepancy in the learning. So other health impaired also can be if they have severe allergies that could cause them to miss school. Did you, Sydney?
I think my brother's in this because he has Crohn's disease and chronic headaches.
Perfect. That is a perfect example. There's other health categories that impair your progress in school. So say, for example, you have a health impairment like chronic fatigue or Crohn's. If you're having daily headaches, so you have to accommodate him throughout the day, like maybe they have to leave the classroom for a certain period of time. Maybe they have an aide that's with them so that when they start feeling, it could be a child, actually a severe diabetic. Because the severe diabetic, you have to monitor their glucose throughout the day, which is the nurse's job, it's not the teacher's job, but as the teacher in the classroom, if you do have a child with a health impairment as such, you have to be aware, and they'll train you as the teacher, to what to look for as signs and symptoms. So say, for example, a child has chronic migraine. You have to be aware of looking at the signs and symptoms because a migraine is very debilitating. I don't know if any of you have ever had a migraine headache. You know the progress, and you can't be within the light. You have to be someplace in a dark room, and so there's certain other health impairment that could affect the progress of a child being in school for the certain length of time or expecting the same thing as all the other students. So there are accommodations to help with that. And it's not necessarily a learning disability. How about the category of multiple disabilities? That opened up a huge. What do you think that would mean to you as a teacher in the classroom? Well, if you look through the rest of the category list, starting with specific learning disabilities, specific learning disabilities would be learning disabilities that would mean that they have difficulty in the math, in the core areas, reading. Sometimes they have both, reading and math. Sometimes they may have only reading disability and not math. Now, those students that are classified under specific learning disabilities as like reading and math, they are given, again, the IEP, and they have a special ed teacher who accommodates their instruction, not the whole time out of your classroom, but it could be through an inclusion, through a blended program of a co-teacher, or sometimes a pull-out time with the special education teacher. So they would work with you, go through the curriculum that you're teaching, and then they modify it, and they give you some modifications, and they work on modifications with the student. So a multiple disability would be the child might have a learning disability along with, say, hearing impairment, or a speech disability along with a learning disability. They don't have to go hand in hand. But if a child has multiple areas, that means they're receiving multiple services. And remember, and I know all of you, when you recorded your response, IDEA is the law that protects us because it also gives us federal funding to help hire the staff for those students in school and buy the materials that are necessary. Because say, for example, God bless you, the visually impaired, it costs money to buy the extra equipment. So there's where the money comes from, the federal government. Now the 504, you don't receive extra funding for that. It's modifications in the classroom. So say it's a child with severe allergies. That can be an impairment for their learning because you have to safeguard that they're not around if it's food allergies. So what are some of the accommodations you would do if it's a food allergy, severe food allergy in your classroom? Have any of you been in classrooms with? Right. And now the problem is, because of our processed food, and they're saying that has been more detrimental. When I was growing up, we never heard about food allergies. And it's not because it probably wasn't there, but it's because of the way we process our foods right now. Take the time sometimes to read the ingredients on your foods that you're eating. Especially, I should pull the Doritos, but if you look at the ingredients on there, there's lots of chemical names that are included in our foods now that are AKAs for products that contain tree nut, peanut oils that are peanut tree nuts, also gluten, also dairy. The products are hidden in these other products. I had a mom, she actually was on the council. Her child was so severely allergic that she never ate ever in the cafeteria. She had an aide, and she ate by herself in the classroom with the aide all the time. I don't know what they're doing for her now because she's in the middle school. That's very difficult socially. That's really difficult to be growing up always eating by yourself in the classroom. But she couldn't, it was because they said it was more of an inhalant also on top of all of her food allergies. So she couldn't even like smell those foods. So that family has never gone out to eat in a restaurant. Can you imagine never ever going to eat in a restaurant? I mean, I'm like, wow. Because she could not be around. She could not, we have our neighbors and they travel with us all the time, and wherever we go to eat, we'll just call ahead and say, you know, are your foods prepared in a peanut oil or nut oil? Because it's really dangerous, you know, as an inhalant. But this mom, she was very vigilant. I mean, she could tell you every ingredient on every package that she's ever buying, but there were so many pseudonyms that came up with other things that are added into our food. She bought a jar of spaghetti, and she said she never buys the jar of spaghetti, but she was like in a hurry. She bought a jar of spaghetti, served it, and all of a sudden the child started going into anaphylactic shock, which is, do you know what anaphylactic? Your throat closes up, all of a sudden, you know, you can't breathe, you quickly need an EpiPen and get the child to the hospital. And she was like, I don't know what you know, she said, I don't know what anything was around her, you know, with peanut. They went back and they looked at the ingredients on the bottle, and there were some other additives that was a different chemical that had a peanut source in it. So even when the foods that you think are safe, probably are not. And that's why doctors are saying, try to stick to healthy foods like fruits and vegetables, and, I mean, even breads. You know, like if you really read those packages, it's kind of dangerous on what we're eating.
I was gonna say, like, as a teacher, you gotta be careful with that. Like, my brother, he used to be anaphylactic allergic to all poultry and seafood.
Ah.
And in 4th grade, they were having like their Native American Day, and everybody brought in food, and the teacher was forcing each kid to try every single thing.
Oh, gosh.
And my brother kept telling her that he could not eat it, and she kept trying to force him, and finally in the end, she went over and discovered it had chicken and turkey in it. But she was not listening to him at all, so he couldn't.
He didn't eat it, did he?
No.
Oh, thank goodness. He was smart.
Grade,
Right.
He had to tell his teacher.
Right.
And he couldn't eat it.
Well, and honestly, your best advocate is yourself. I mean, you should trust the child, because the children with allergies know their own systems and they know their own symptomatic feelings when they eat certain foods. And that's why it's a hard thing. Like if you're a parent and you have a birthday party, I mean, you better be aware if any child is coming with any kind of food allergies. And it's not, I heard some parents say, well, that's tough luck. You know, like, I'm not going to accommodate, that's their problem. And I'm like, how could you even say that? I mean, that's like so unfair to a child. And then they started excluding some children with food allergies. Well, that's kind of like reverse discrimination. Serena? Yeah. That's actually the safest, best way as a teacher. We used to have, you know, everybody brought in a rotating snack, you know, like especially in kindergarten. You know, one parent was in charge of this week, one parent, you know, and we used to have those general snacks, and we did away with it. Because, again, even if you read the product labels, you can't be assured that whatever's in that product label. That was why, too, we've gone away from, like my school, we did not have any home-baked goods coming in at all. I got slammed from my parents about not allowing cupcakes. You would have thought that I ripped those kids out of, I mean, it was unbelievable, the parents that were trying to boycott, like I was mean against birthdays. No, we just said, let's not make it a food thing, because you're ostracizing kids that can't have those foods. Plus, think about homes. You can't guarantee, even if the parents said, well, I made a peanut-free snack. Think of those other products. There's eggs, there's soy, there's milk products, there's gluten that kids are so allergic to. And you can't guarantee that every parent home that is bringing in snacks comes from a clean environment in the household or kitchen. The teachers would say to me, yeah, you know, the kids would feel good about bringing in things for the teachers. Then, you know, the teachers knew, well, we're not eating the snack. you're not going to be rude to the child. Don't do it in front of the child. But you have to be really cautious. And you are their protector in the classroom. So one snack like that, you wouldn't want to be the teacher with the child going into an anaphylactic shock. Yes, you are trained in use of the EpiPen, but you really don't want that to happen in your classroom. So caution is your best advocate. How about the developmental delay disability? Think about what we talked about: cognitive development, psychomotor development. Remember we went through the ages of, what do you think developmental delay would be as a disability? Take a guess. Think of the key word, development.
Students aren't in the proper age group.
Right. What we typically say, and no child is ever, this is every 5-year-old looks the same. But developmentally delayed could be speech, but it could be motor skills or fine motor skills. Developmentally delayed could also be cognitively not able to process the same information as their other age. So one of the worst things we've ever done is attached grade level numbers to ages of children. Because I was in a school that we took away the numbers for grades 1, 2, and 3. It was a radical idea. It was a great idea. We called it the Rainbow Connection. And what we did is we had kids moving through the spectrum of the rainbow. So when they were through one color, they moved up into the next developmental color. But the parents were the ones that, again, advocated against it. Can you guess why? The kids were happy as can be. But can you guess why parents did not like it? They didn't understand it, even though we did a lot of orientation and explained it to them. Parents wanted to know, bottom line, yes, but what grade is this? They were stuck on the grade. And we said the kids progressed at their appropriate time through their appropriate level when they were ready. And parents didn't like that. They wanted a number attached. They wanted a grade attached to their child. And we said, every child will be successful by the time they're through this spectrum, whether they be assigned to a number like 3rd grade or 4th grade, but they will be ready to go on to that next level. But that's why we kind of had to go back, and because there was so much parent negativity about it. So developmental delays could be any part of those areas. Learning delays. Maybe they have not acquired their literacy skills and they're delayed in that process of thinking and processing reading. Emotional disturbances is a huge category because in that avenue you have all kinds of what we call ED disabilities. And everything from the emotional disturbances of the child who can't control their emotions, and typically if they're severe enough, those are the classes that are small group instruction with a teacher and an aide or a teacher and 2 aides. And so they're not part of your classroom. Only because we're not trying to ostracize, but typically if a child is truly emotionally disabled, they can't function in the social group of a whole classroom. So they need that small group attention. And plus, they're monitoring their behavior so severely that there's so much adaptive behavioral intervention in the classroom, you couldn't keep up as a regular ed teacher with all of that.
Is this where like ODD would fall, or would that be in something else?
Okay, that's another process. That's oppositional defiant disorder. It depends on the severity of it. Some kids, like parents will come in and say, I think this child is ODD. There's so many labels going out there, and some of it is just good behavioral intervention. And that's where we go back to that response to intervention. If a child is acting out like that in the classroom, it's not severe enough to be like throwing the furniture across the classroom. But opposing the teacher or refusing to do work, that's not necessarily oppositional defiant disorder. It could be the child environmentally was used to getting their way, and when you're in a structured situation of school and being made to comply with what's happening in the classroom, they may not like it. So then we put in place, and that happens through RTI, you put in place behavioral intervention strategies that you try with the student. And again, we never put a teacher at risk or other students at risk. But if it's a defiance, then you try to put those behavioral interventions in place first. And then you work through it. How about any of the others? How about traumatic brain injury? Is anyone aware of that category or? Yep. And that's opening up a whole new area for us right now in schools. Because usually that category was a very small category. I had a student who was in kindergarten at the time, and the mom had a very serious car accident. And through the accident, he had a very, very severe concussion, but it caused a traumatic brain injury, which means one part of his brain was affected and injured to the fact that it lost the capabilities. So the part of the brain that he was affected from was his spinal cord, and he could no longer walk. And he lost speech. And that poor mom never, ever forgave herself for that. I mean, that's a traumatic thing for a parent to happen, because he was an absolutely typical, normal 5-year-old when it happened. And after he never walked again, and he was unable to speak. And so, you know, naturally there was a lot of adaptations for his. So yes, a traumatic brain injury can be caused by a concussion, a serious car accident, a fall. You hear of many babies, infants, who are dropped or unfortunately abused, and they're thrown down and causes traumatic brain injury. They lose the capabilities of speech, sometimes hearing. It depends on what part of the brain is affected. So as a teacher, I mean, that child should be part of the regular classroom, so exposed to all of the information that you're teaching to all the other students, but will have to be adapted. Sometimes it's the use of having technology with them. If they can't speak, they use technology to communicate with you. All right. Now, at the bottom of that page, again, it's about the IEP, the individual education plan, but that's once the child is classified and then the IEP is developed. And you see the key to that is you take the child's present level of academic and functional performance, where you want them to function at, and that's how you develop the plan. So it's not a plan that dummies down the work. It's a plan that addresses where you want them to move to and where they are right now. And the annual goals are important because you have to set the goals high with expectations, but not too high, because you want them to know that you expect this amount of work, but with intervention and extra help to achieve it. And again, as in all good teaching, you constantly monitor the success, so you know if they're meeting their goals or not. And then on the next page, the specific special education and related services to be provided. And we'll show you on the next page, it shows you an example of it. So say if the child has visual impairment, in his IEP or her IEP, it has to spell out visual therapy 3 times a week, 40 minutes a session. And those mandates must be kept. Those amount of minutes must be kept. And it's all documentation, because it's all legal work, because you have to prove that the parents could actually say, like if you didn't meet his mandates, like say for example, you have a day off from school. Somehow those mandates need to be made up during that week because he's mandated under law to receive that amount of instruction. So that's why superintendents and teachers and principals panic when we have like numerous snow days off, it affects all of these programs. Yes, the kids think this is great, but it affects all the programs that you have to catch up, all the mandated minutes and time for all. It also has an explanation in there of the students program and the fact that if it's a special education program, those services will not be in the general education classroom or school setting without, like, the special education teacher there. So a classroom teacher is not responsible to carry out all of the IEP mandates because we're saying it's above and beyond the general education classroom, which is yours. And it's a statement how the student will participate to state and district-wide assessments. That is a huge area for parents and teachers in an IEP because there are no exclusions to state assessments unless the disability is so severe. I mean, but you have to go through, the paperwork is inordinate in order to have a child not take the state assessment, barring the fact they vomit all over the test. But really, every child, no matter what their disability is expected to take those New York State assessments.
Is there any reason why they haven't made accommodations for that? 'Cause I feel like there should be.
The accommodations for state assessment fall under the IEP. So if the child gets extended time, that's one accommodation for a child with a learning disability, then we must give them extended time on that state assessment. If the only problem is, like on the reading assessment, and if it's a child that we have to read to the child, like through their instruction, we cannot read the test, which is, we've argued that fact for years. How mean that is to a student who is 3 years below level and say taking the third grade test that is written at or above the third grade level, because state tests are written with increasingly difficulty. That's why when you take those tests, it starts out fairly, you're pretty confident. It starts out pretty easy because you're able to read it and you're able to respond, and then what happens as you go on through those tests? It's like Regis. All of a sudden they get lengthier, and now they've increased the minutes to 90 minutes for these tests. They have to sit for 90 minutes. Third graders. I mean, you're talking 8, 9 years old. Can you imagine sitting for 90 minutes at that age? I mean, that's why we're saying the discrepancy is just so huge for assessments. And, my point was on the, we can't read the test. The only thing we can read to them is the instruction. And then we say, go, do your best. Well, guess what happens to those poor kids who are that learning disabled, and they have to sit there for 90 minutes. You can't, they can't just say, I'm done. Guess what they end up doing? Either nothing, or they start filling out the sheet, the random bubble. They have a nice pattern going, or they look at the word, and you try to give them the strategies, and the special education teacher says, do your best. See if you can scan through, find the words you might know, see if you can get an idea of the story. But you know yourself, as a typical average student, when you're working through those tests, it's hard. And you put a learning disabled child in that situation who's having a really grave time trying to read the information, is very frustrating. That's when children break down. They're in tears. And you as a classroom teacher, I mean, your heart goes out to them, but there's nothing you can do to say, it's okay, just, skip the test, So that's why when all those reports come out in the paper, and they start reporting out all the school districts that are not keeping their annual yearly progress, and they segregate the groups to show you which group is not doing as well as the other, what are the groups they report out? Did you ever look at those reports in the paper? They segregate out by males, females, learning disabled, other, cultures. They have subgroups of, the paperwork is inordinate as a principal when I had to fill out every single group of kids. I had to mark how many were African American, how many were black but not Latino, it is how many Caucasian. They segregate the group's test results by all these different subcategories, because they want to know that the minorities are doing as well as or above the white. And then they measure males, females. They report out the data and they say, how come your males are not doing as well as your females at this age? Then they look at the special ed population and they break those up. And they say your special ed population is not maintaining and doing as well in growth. Well, guess what? It's not that it's self-fulfilling. We could have told you that before you gave them a state assessment. That's why they're receiving special education help. So the contradiction with what we're doing with assessments and with learning disability, it's just a continuous cycle of what we know is best instruction in school. You'll see the section down there of the 504. And the key is in that second paragraph through the section 504, all school-age children are ensured an equal opportunity to participate in school activities. The definition of disability is broad in the section 504. If a student has a condition that substantially limits participation in school. So say a child that has chronic fatigue. It's a child that probably doesn't get up in the morning, can't get the full night's sleep, may not, so you accommodate their day. Maybe they have a 3-hour day. Maybe it's home instruction the student is put on. So that's what the key to a 504. It will substantially limit their participation. So if it's a severe diabetic and their glucose level fluctuates during the day and they need time to go to the nurse, receive extra glucose, you have to monitor their injection, you have to monitor their lunch, that's an impairment to substantially limiting some time in their school day. So as a teacher, you must be, it's confidential information you'll receive on each one of your children, but you have to only discuss that information like with the parents or the nurse or the principal and the special ed teacher. So this is a planning form for IDEA on the other page, and you see that this is for employment. So the students are covered all the way through into adulthood. So and that's called the equal opportunity. You want these people to be successful and out and working. On the next page are examples of accommodations under the 504 on table 4.4. The attention, sometimes it's attention deficit disorder, sometimes it's just a behavioral, but one of the accommodations that we would put in place in the classroom is seating preference in the classroom. Say it's a student that loses attention frequently in the classroom. Well, you want to focus their attention by placing them in the place in your classroom where they will get the most focused attention. So say if you have an open classroom, and everybody's able to go wherever they want to move, that would be a devastating placement for a child with a attention disorder. So typically they move the child someplace closer towards the teacher or wherever you're delivering the information. They work in small groups. So that's called preferential seating. You look at provide clues such as clock faces indicating beginning and ending times for instruction. Remember the little boy at the beginning of the semester I told you in kindergarten that just started kindergarten and he was sitting by himself? Well, the parent, when she finally talked to the teacher realized that this was a child that needed to know his schedule throughout the day because he needed to know what was happening next. So once the teacher provided for him that today is Thursday, at 9 o'clock we're going to do this, at 10 o'clock we're going to do this, structured his day, he was completely fine with that. That's what he needed as that structure. And there are those kids that need that. They need to know what's coming next. That's why instructionally it's so important when you have your objectives on the board, every child needs to know, what are we doing today? Don't you need to know what you're doing during your day? Can you imagine if you didn't know what your plan was and you just kind of wander through the day? How would you feel? Yeah, it would make you anxious, you would get nervous, you'd probably get headaches. So that's what those kids feel like. They need to know what's happening at all times. Accommodating homework and assignments under 504. Say a child has a hard time. Some teachers give that inordinate amount of homework, and it might end up that some kids in certain grade levels end up with an hour or more homework. Some of the accommodations that we give to those kids is you break down the homework and you give them 15 minutes worth of homework. Because in 15 minutes worth of homework, if you give the semblance of the same kind of math problems or reading that everybody else did and they can accomplish it in 15 minutes, that's fine. That's all they can manage, and that's fine. So that's an accommodation. Record the lessons so the student can listen to them. We put a lot of books on tape. You as a teacher might record your own instruction, kind of like what we're doing with the swiveling. So if a child needs to hear the information again, you have it recorded and you provide it for them to take home. Sometimes it's note-taking for older students. And so someone else takes the notes and provides the notes to them, and they take the notes home so that they can reread on their own because they can't provide their own notes. So all these accommodations is what the team will determine the child needs. Okay, the next part on students with learning challenges and the whole area of neuroscience. I'm not going to go back through it again because most of this has to go through the brain research, but I brought something interesting for you to see today. I actually found this doctor here in Amherst. And so I brought in this brochure to show you. Remember when I was talking about how they've done so much with neuroscience that even with stroke victims, concussions, brain injury, they're trying to rejuvenate the brain. Come on up. They're not picking it up. Why is this not going on? There we go. This is a doctor that it's called the Positive Health and Wellness Center. And I was talking to her about it because I told her, you know, what I teach and the fascination. And so she shared with me, these are not the doctors. The doctors' names, I think, are on the back. Yes. John Zeliaks and Christina Traska. What they did is through Positive Health and Wellness, they have the center and they do neurofeedback. And if you look here, under these categories, through neurofeedback, and have you ever heard of neurofeedback before? Working with the brain, and it helps all of these different, can everybody see that? You can't, let me zoom this in. I'll move this over. I think it's because it's a blue. Okay. These are some of the areas that they've been able to help through their neuroscience therapy. And you see ADHD is number one, probably because there's so many parents coming, because the whole issue, and I know some of you are doing some research on it, the whole issue with ADHD in schools, what typically is the treatment plan that they do for ADHD? Adderall. They have their drugs of choice. And unfortunately, that should not be the first answer. That's why we developed RTI. RTI was an answer to say to parents, don't jump to the medicine as your first try. Try first through behavioral interventions. So the neuroscience area is trying to help with, they've done so much research that they find there's certain parts of the brain that are affected. And so if you're working with those parts of the brain, you can actually help with these different areas for therapy. So you see it's anxiety, brain injury, depression, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, migraines, PTSD, which is now such a huge area affecting all of our veterans that they're not accommodating and helping them with, substance abuse, addiction, autism, chronic fatigue, epilepsy, seizures, insomnia, memory loss, obsession, OCD, stroke, and more. Because there are so many categories in our society now that the first thing they say is, well, here's a pill. What do you see every other commercial on TV? And I love those commercials because they say, if you are experiencing paralyzation or, inability to speak or death, please don't stop and take this medicine. Hello? If we already know that those are severe side effects, medicine can't be that good. And it's scary because little children are being put on these psychotropic drugs. And once you're on them, they actually change the neurons in your brain. So once you're on them, guess what? It's a life sentence unless you could put them through a withdrawal program. And then you have the parents that unfortunately disagree. So they're not, and sometimes, and I've dealt with that, with parents who are either divorced or they're living in two homes. And so the one parent will put it on and the other parent will take them off. Well, guess what happens when you're taking that kind of med? Your brain is so scrambled at that point because it's one of those drugs that once you take it, you have to take them consistently. It kicks in and it doesn't take effect right away. It's not a snap drug that they have to take it long over time. So if you take the child off of it and then put them on it and then off of it, it messes up all the neurons in the brain. So with the biofeedback, this is just kind of an overall practice. And I'm not selling, please don't think I'm selling this program. I'm not. I'm telling you this is what our latest research is trying to do to help address the needs in our society right now. So they actually do a brain mapping. How do you think they do that? How do you create a brain map of your brain, individual brains? CAT scan, MRIs and CAT scans. So they actually hook you up and they can get the activity in the brain. That's what they do with stroke victims when they're trying to see which parts of the brain might be paralyzed. That's what they do with TBI and brain injury. And then they look through those results and they analyze them. So an EEG is used as a recording to get those brain waves assessed. And they look at the normal range for that age person comparative to what that person's brain map looks like. And then they create these neurofeedback sessions for them. And it's a way to build the functional pathways again through the brain. Now, some people felt like you can't ever rebuild the pathways to the brain. Well, thank goodness that we've done so much research over this time that finally people are realizing, yes, you can. You can rebuild pathways. Stroke victims, they tell you all the time, if you catch the stroke early enough and you start these pathway buildings right away, they won't lose permanent disability of their speech or their muscles. Again, it says it does not target any particular disorder, but it changes timing and activation patterns in the brain. So you know something you do for a long period of time over and over and over again becomes a habit. And so that's what they're doing through neurofeedback. But it's not a quick fix. So I'm guessing, parents might have a difficult time with this because it's going to be one of those dedicated things that you're going to have to do a lot, numerous times. They even show, this is a sample of a brain map. So they're looking at the colors, and if it's a yellow indication area, it's a very high feedback, and it goes down to very low. And then this is a visual analysis of the major functions of the brain. So they take the colors, and then this is a comparative diagram that they do with the normal brain, and then the 4 different areas of the brain of that person and how they function comparatively. And I just thought this was so appropriate, fit in this class, that I think, you know, there's hope for looking at this research to help us as practitioners and parents and teachers. Let's go back. So then if we go further on through the students with hyperactivity and attention disorder, there's a whole part in this chapter. Just be aware, reading through is everything we're talking about. There's a difference between inattention and hyperactivity. And actually, environment is a huge causation for so much of it. So let's go to the lessons for teachers on 145. Because ultimately, that's where all of this drives to. It's to who you are as a teacher and how you're going to adapt in the classroom. We know appropriately there's a lot of stress on teachers to accomplish a certain amount of curriculum over the time of one school year. But we also have to be cognizant with the students that we have in front of us and break that down. So that's where the accommodations come in for students with disabilities. But I venture to argue that best practices across the board in your classroom is what's going to help all of your children succeed. If you have 10-year-olds in front of you, you are not going to do a 30-minute lesson and expect that they're going to be in tune with you for 30 minutes. So you as a teacher have to think, I have 10 key minutes for that main instruction. I'm going to do my mini lesson. I'm going to hit that instruction objective that I have, and guess what I'm going to do the rest of the time with them? You go take a nap? No. What happens next? You help them, you practice, you have them in groups, you have them talking, you have them working with the information that you just taught. And students with disabilities might need a shorter period of time than that. And they may need more hands-on practice than that. Looking further down, the third paragraph down, as a teacher, you can look for times when the student is engaged, even short times. To keep record as a good teacher, you look for that engagement. But you provide the engagement activities in the classroom which will keep your kids motivated. How many times did you fall asleep in your high school classes? There were long periods of time. Right? To be honest. Why? Oh, it's okay. You go to sleep. Oh, yeah. Cross your face. Here.
Where I went, we had block scheduling, so...
Perfect.
Well, my first 2 years, we had hour and 20-minute classes, then they switched it to where it was only an hour, so it was just a long lecture. Like sitting there.
And it was all lecture for everyone?
Yeah, it was just like your basic classes.
Okay. So they didn't alternate the activities within it. If you have to have a block schedule like that, if you're in the typical high school middle schedule, you as a teacher should look at what you're doing within that 90-minute or an hour time to look how you can vary your activities to keep your kids engaged. No one can be engaged for that amount of time in a lecture, can you? I find it hard myself. I mean, I'm trying to motivate in this class so that we do a lot of other activities, but it's hard to sit here and listen to the information and really take it in, right? And you're talking about young children. And then they say, well, they can't sit still. Well, what have you done to motivate them? Do they get up and move around? That's where Brain Gym comes in. Can they switch around? Do they have to always sit in the chair? Can they be on the floor if they need to? Give them that. It just doesn't mean that they're not going to pay attention if they're sitting on the floor. It means you're accommodating what they need to do. students with communication disorders on the bottom. Now, communication disorders could be many different things. Not the inability just to speak, but unable to find the words and the vocabulary and the language to be linguistic. So what's an accommodation you can do for a student that has a very difficult time communicating with you? Are you going to be calling on that student all the time? What would you do? How would you help accommodate so that you know that that child is listening to you or getting the information? Check on them, and they could write the written reflection. What did we say earlier? What do you do with your information? You can record it. It's an audio. You give them accommodations that way. You have them work together with someone. Even if they're not able to communicate back and forth, if they're listening to someone else and they're nodding and they're reflecting with it, that's a way to do that. If you look on the next page, students with ADHD and recommendations. So many of our students, and it's not just students with ADHD, we learn well visually. We learn well with things around us. Ask me directions and I can tell you specifics of maybe not always the street names, but I can tell you visually where to turn by the markers. You'll find a red building or a certain store because we're visual learners. And what do we do in schools? What happens with instruction in school? What's the majority of instruction that typically happens? Lecture, or read to yourself and answer questions, do a test on your own. That's not visual learning. Visual learning needs to have all that motivation, the pictures around them. So having all kinds of things around your classroom that motivate that learning. That's why when you walk into elementary classrooms, you're like bombarded, right? With all that visual around you. And then all of a sudden, like seriously, what happens when you get to middle school? It's like some teachers. I'm not saying all. Yeah. Is there anything in the classrooms? No. There's nothing motivation around. That's why I said this was really hard for me. I said this is like such a stoic environment to learn in. I wish that I had like one room that I could just be in all the time so that I could decorate it and just have that stimulation around us all the time, because this is hard. Our life's not like this. Is your room like this? No. Once you're out in the environment, it's not like this. This is not natural learning. So think about that in your classroom. You also limit the homework, and for some reason, parents always say, I want lots of homework. I don't know why. Because if they didn't learn it in school, if you pound on lots of homework for them at home, are they going to learn it? Homework should be the sense of reviewing something that they've already learned that they're practicing. If that's not the purpose you're giving homework, don't give it. I said that over and over to teachers. What's the purpose of that homework? Please don't give them homework that's busy work. It has to be something meaningful that you're practicing what they already know, what they've been taught in the classroom. The next page is the students with emotional and behavioral difficulties. Go down to the bottom of the page. Structure the environment. Everything goes back to behavioral structures. If it's a child that can't be around lots of stimulus, you don't provide more stimulus. You seclude them more in an area that you take away maybe so much of that noise. You turn the lights off. You accommodate the room arrangements. So think about the structure and how you're helping. You structure your schedules differently. That's timing. You look at your schedule and you say, okay, I'm going to move them from this activity in 15 minutes into this activity, and I'm going to move it around. It's a lot of work for you as a teacher, because you're constantly thinking, how can I accommodate this? In the table 4.8 on 148, there's the emotional disturbance. An inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. They can't learn because of something emotional that's stopping the brain. An inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships. These are the kids that won't get along with others in the classroom. They emotionally can't communicate with others. They may be angry. They may hit. So you have to be wary of, how are you going to place them in the classroom? Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances. A general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. Sometimes we talk about kids who are on the autistic spectrum, having poor social skills, because that's part of their disability. So you help them with some of that modeling. You build in successful social relationships for them in the classroom to help them. All right, if we flip on the next page, on 150, the myths and facts about suicide. Part of the whole emotional component right now, and it's pervasive in our society, along with substance abuse. You hear the heroin epidemic right now is unbelievably explosive. Just because I'm aware, because we have our scanner going all the time because of the fire department, there is not a day that goes by that I don't hear within our area of Lancaster and Depew and West Seneca and that whole area that I'm listening to on the scanner of multiple calls for heroin overdose. And unfortunately, my daughter is a director of one of the Horizon substance abuse sites. It's a hard job because it's a brain functioning substance abuse. They're self-medicating because of other things that are happening in their life. But heroin is so addictive, you can't live without it once you're hooked on heroin. And so that's why there's so many trainers out there right now. My daughter trains on the Narcan. It's not an excuse. Like she said, isn't it better to give a family who knows that their child, and it's younger and younger, or an adult, is a heroin user, to give them at least, it's like an EpiPen, at least something to save their life. So if they're going into a heroin overdose, or they are in a heroin overdose, at least give them that chance to live. And then hopefully get help to get over the substance abuse. That's why there's so many trainers out there. And if you saw on the news, now all the school nurses are being trained and have Narcan in their schools. Because unfortunately, it's younger and younger being addicted to drugs. It's really hard. And I have to say as a teacher, you have to be aware of that, especially if you're in middle and high school. You have to be aware of what that looks like if a student is a substance abuser in your classroom. You have to be aware of what to look for. And you're their first advocate to get them help. All right, as we already did the RTI model, and we talked about the tiers, so I'm not going to go back through that again. We did the G&T, and there's one spot I just want you to pay attention to for on 163 that's going back to you as a classroom teacher making a referral. A referral means that someone in your classroom that you're concerned about for whatever learning, emotional, behavioral. A referral means you fill out the paperwork to go to that committee in your building for RTI to say, I need additional help. And as a teacher, it's okay for you to say, I'm not sure what to do. I need additional help from someone else to help me with this student be successful. So these are the steps. And the number one, you always contact the parents. Don't do that behind the parents' back. You contact the parents and you say, I've noticed these specific things. You don't diagnose. You don't say to the parent, I think your child has an emotional problem. Because guess what? You've just turned the parents off completely. But you talk to them and say, during the day, I find, sometimes, the child has poor attention or sometimes gets very upset. What do you do at home to help the child during that time? and you try to build a relationship with them and say, can we go on further, and I'd like to have a referral for our committee. We have a committee, and you explain it to them. And if you're not well versed in it, don't be afraid to say to your school counselor or to the school psychologist or the principal, can you meet with me with these parents so that you can better explain what it is, because you don't want to go backwards and then have to re-explain again. So making a referral is a part of the teacher's responsibility, but do it together with someone else. Okay. In Edmodo, I did post the next chapters, but what I'm going to do right now, you're posted up to lesson 6, and I have it due November 10th. Because the research paper is coming up, and we're going to talk about that today in the deadline, I'd like to give you more time to concentrate on your research paper, collect all the information, really start working on it or writing it. So I'm not going to post any more chapters for you to do. I'll work on these chapters in class with you. We'll do activities, so you'll get all the information, but I want you to really concentrate on your research project now. So I brought in today, I looked at the calendar, and I think feasibly December 1st I'm going to make the deadline date for your submission for all your research papers. That gives you now a full month, December 1st. So I brought in the sign-ups. Now I'm anticipating that we can get at least 5 presentations. Now I did post the presentation rubric also on Edmodo, so I want you to take a look at that. I'm not expecting, I don't want a huge production presentation. What I want you to share with us, you're teaching us. You have become an expert once you do all of your research on whatever topic you're researching. You are spending the time, you're reading the research, you're putting it together, you're making statements, you're putting it together in your paper to share with me. But this is going to be your opportunity to teach us what you've learned. So I want you to think about, as a teacher, what's the best way that you would like to do to teach that to the class? Yes, you can do it through the PowerPoint, but I would say embed some other things. Embed some activities that you might think would help you teach the activity. Don't think that you have to hand out, maybe make up something that would be an activity to show what it means. Use a lot of visuals. I don't want you to take your research paper and post it up in your PowerPoint. Okay? So use visuals. Use a video. Use examples. Make the class do something. Embed an activity in the class that they have to do that would teach us whatever the information is that you're researching. Okay? The PowerPoint then you can create afterwards, except for the group that is December 1st. So I put the dates of December 1st, December 3rd, December 8th, December 10th, and then December 17th is the date of the exam scheduled, the 2 hours. Actually, it's a little more than that. So if we need that as the overflow, we'll just finish up on that day. So I don't know if any of you are prepared today, but I want you to think about, when would you like to present your information? And then I'll have the sign up on Tuesday, and just put your name and the topic that you're presenting. And then I have a group rubric that we use as the presentation is happening to give feedback. And I think I'm going to tweak that up a little bit because they were really lengthy. But because it's important, if you're teaching to the class, I think it's important to also get feedback. Okay? The teacher interview, that's a good question. Sorry, I was going to do that. Teacher interview is due by the end of the semester. So you have plenty of time to set it up. Remember to look at those questions thoroughly. Come up with your own questions that you want to add on, that's something you really want to know. So you have time. if you're away, I mean, you can plan that maybe during break, Thanksgiving break, or don't we have one more day in November?
The teacher interview is grades K through 6?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
No, you can use any grade level.
okay.
So it might be a teacher you know well. It might be your favorite teacher. Someone even asked me if they could use, because they're out of this area, if they could use one of the college professors here. Yes. Yes, you can if you want to use one of your college professors. Because a teacher is a teacher is a teacher. You should be able to ask the same questions of a teacher here at college.
Is there like a certain set of questions?
Yes, it's all on the syllabus. Everything's posted on the syllabus. So, now that go back and look at the syllabus and look at those questions again. And I want you to really think about what we've talked about here in class. What would you really want to know now from a seasoned teacher?
For our paper, the syllabus says like you want 9 sources, so that's the.
I said at least 9 sources, because a good research, solid research, that would give you a good cross-section if you can. So if your topic you're not finding 9, let me know, but you should be able to. I would say that you'd be able to type in other keywords that would match with like movement and even that society.
Okay.
So does anybody have any concerns or any other questions on the research paper?
No, not on
Ugh.
the research paper, but are you going to be posting the syllabus on Edmodo? Because I was trying to look
It
for
is.
it, and I can't find it.
I think I reposted it again. Was everybody able to find the syllabus? Yeah.
Wait,
For this class on Edmodo. I know it was in library. Okay, why is this? Oh, you know what? Mrs. Z said that she reposted it in another way so that you can all get to library. And see, I can't because I'm the administrator on here. Did anybody else find it? She said she changed it so that it's up front and you can get to your materials. Where is the... I know the syllabus was on here because I reposted it. Lesson 3. Is it?
Isn't that the rubric right there?
Yeah, this is the presentation rubric and the research rubric. But I know I have the syllabus posted.
Oh, the syllabus.
It is on Blackboard. You're right, thank you. I will repost it again. I don't know why it's not. Here's the syllabus. It was in folders. Wait. No, it's not. I will go back again tonight, I promise, and find what happened to it, because I know even Mrs. Z checked it and she said it was up there. I will check it. Because I don't think, did I give this class a hard copy? Didn't I give you? Yeah, I did. The first class, I gave you a hard copy of the syllabus. Jackie, did you get the hard copy? Yeah, I did. Okay. Yeah, go back through your syllabus. All the questions are there. The guidelines for the interview are there. And do not pay attention. I thought I took it off too. If you record your interview, that's for you, not for me. I don't want you to upload it and post it for me. That's for you. That's like between you and the teacher, because it's better, again, as an auditory, visual. If you have a recording of your interview, you're not trying drastically to script every word the teacher's saying. You can get, an outline and, write key words, but then you go back and play it back, and then you're able to type out your script of your answers. So that's why I said tape it. Or use your phone.
So when it says upload the interview at Blackboard.
Right, do not do that. Don't upload the interview for me. That's only for you. So don't upload the interview. Because I also don't want your teacher to think that, we're playing the interview, out loud for anybody. It's just for you and the teacher, just so you're learning information. Okay? Any other questions?
You don't need to transcribe word for word.
No, just give your answer, give the responses to your questions.
I had to transcribe word for word in an interview once.
Oh,
It's like 20 minutes.
no, as long as you give me the gist of what they said back to your questions, like the teacher said that, that's fine. And look, it's pouring rain again. Isn't that nice? We need a shuttle. Yeah, that's what we need. Oh, I know, because you get blown across Main Street and